You're at home watching the 6 o'clock news. As the daily headlines flash by, a small pit of anxiety starts to form in your stomach. Maybe it's a relative, a friend, or even a colleague, but somebody in your life is living in Iran, and it seems like the situation there is getting worse. People are fleeing cities, the government is shutting down communication networks. Maybe you better give that certain somebody a call, just to ease your spirits and make sure that they're okay. You pick up your phone, type in the number, and wait for the call to connect. But after that usual delay a long-distance call takes to go through, your friend seemingly picks up right away. And even stranger than that, the person on the other end of the phone is very obviously not your friend. You hang up and check the number, but it appears to be correct. You call again, but the same person picks up and gives the same weird speech. While they may be speaking English, there's something off about the way they're talking. It's stilted and unemotional, and it just gives you the creeps. You hang up again and decide to look up online if there's something wrong with Iran's phone network. Maybe you're just getting patched through to the wrong person. But that doesn't appear to be the case, because countless other people online are also encountering this same voice speaking the same words when making calls to their loved ones in Iran. This is what they heard.
Hello?
What?
Hello? Who is calling? I can't hurt you. I can't hurt you. Could you repeat? I'm not sure if you are calling the right number. Who you want to speak with? I'm Alicia. Do you remember me? I think I don't know. Who are you?
The recording is about 40 seconds long, and it seems to consist of an antiquated text-to-speech voice pretending to receive a wrong number. It rambles on with bad grammar and eventually says its name is Alyssa before it stops talking altogether, at which point only silence fills the line. Thousands of people trying to call Iran in the last couple of months have heard this strange recording instead of their loved ones' voices. Considering internet blackouts are now commonplace in the country and phone lines may be the only way for many outsiders to be able to contact their Iranian friends, this is a very disturbing thing to hear. And what's more, is that this isn't the only recording people get when calling into Iran. There's a second one that's even stranger.
Hello, and thank you for taking the time to listen. Today, I'd like to share some thoughts with you and talk about a few things that might resonate in our daily lives. Life is full of unexpected surprises, and these surprises can sometimes bring joy, while at other times, they challenge us. The key dot is to discover the strength within us to overcome these challenges. Now, I'd like you to take a moment and use your imagination.
This message continues like this for another 2 minutes. If you haven't guessed, this was very obviously generated with AI. It's a nonsense ramble about finding your inner strength to overcome challenges and calming down. Again, countless people have heard this exact rant when calling into Iran, and the internet was soon abuzz with a bunch of people all asking the same question. Why is this happening? Shutting down phone networks completely would obviously be a horrible thing to do, but it would at least make some sort of sense. Or just having silence on the other end of the line. Even playing some propaganda or something would be an easy thing to explain. But why play a recording of somebody pretending to pick up the call? Some articles quote experts who have a theory that Israel may have hacked into Iran's phone network and are playing these eerie robotic voices as a form of psychological warfare intended to spread panic. One woman in the UK who was trying to call her mother in Tehran said that,
"Calling your mom and expecting to hear her voice and hearing an AI voice is one of the most scary things I've ever experienced."
Most experts, however, believe that hacking into Iran's phone network to this degree would be next to impossible, and it wouldn't really be worth the immense effort to do so. And in fact, a voice recording trying to calm people, like the second call we talked about, supposedly fits the pattern of how the Iranian government has handled emergency situations in the past. But average users on the Iranian internet have a different and much more unsettling theory as to the purpose of these calls. Let's go back to that first message for a second. The voice is pretending to answer the call and talk to the person on the other end. At first glance, this is just a little bizarre, but if you analyze what the voice is actually saying, it becomes clear what might be happening here.
Who is calling? Who you want to speak with?
The voice asks those questions and then leaves a few seconds of dead air after each one for the caller to respond. Users on Reddit quickly surmise that the Iranian government is likely recording these calls and collecting information from them, which is a theory supported by multiple mainstream media outlets. A chilling PSA would be pinned to the New Iran subreddit, stating that,
If a call is answered, you may hear the voice of a young woman or man repeating Allah. If the voice is unfamiliar, do not speak further. Do not say your name, identify the recipient, or clarify your intended contact. These responses are state-operated, and your voice is being recorded.
Considering this is an ongoing situation, the actual explanation to these strange voice recordings are still a mystery, and people can only really speculate as to what's really happening here. The common consensus among experts seems to be that these messages were implemented by the Iranian government, but whether or not they're using them as a method of surveillance hasn't been verified, and likely will never be, leaving this situation as just one of the many enduring mysteries of the Iranian internet. Salam. What can I even say about a country like Iran? It's home to one of the oldest continuous civilizations on the planet, holding countless ancient treasures of humanity, and it still remains as one of the most culturally distinctive countries today. Being Canadian, I grew up with a ton of Iranian people, and don't even get me started on the food, like tadig, oh my god. As great as that all is, there is an obvious dark side to Iran as well. It's ruled by a very controlling and oppressive government, and has one of the worst human rights records in the world today. One that I could fill an entire upload talking about. But this series isn't about politics. I make these videos not to pass judgments on the societies people live in, but to talk about the internet sagas and the general online culture they've experienced in their everyday lives. In the case of Iran though, it just so happens that a lot of internet sagas happen to involve government overreach, censorship, or potential shadiness in some way. You'll understand why when we get into how the Iranian internet works in general, but before we do that, let's talk about something a little more familiar. On YouTube, you can find a small group of Iranian creators making horror content, ranging from low-effort slop to pretty professional-looking productions. On the higher end of that scale, ghost hunting seems to be a trend on the Iranian internet much like it is on the Arab web. Arab ghost hunting has a very unique style, usually consisting of adventurers exploring abandoned places in the deserts and talking to jinns, which are often just their friends wearing a costume and acting strange. Iranian ghost hunting, on the other hand, seems to follow more Western conventions. Investigators will come to a haunted place and set up their fancy equipment to try to capture evidence of the paranormal. All Arab ghost hunting tends to take place in long abandoned places. These Persian investigations often occur in currently inhabited spaces, with the people living in these spots often wanting help from these supernatural experts to understand and or mitigate their ghost problem. It's very similar to shows like Ghost Hunters or Most Haunted, but just like Arab ghost hunting, jinns seem to be the focus here and not so much the Western idea of spirits. Jinns, or as you may know them, genies, are not really ghosts. Think of them more like a separate race of humanoid cryptids that occupy this plane of existence and have supernatural powers. This definitely affects the way a haunting can happen in Iran, with the different human relationships with jinns being the main focus here rather than a space being haunted by the angry spirit of a dead person. While Iranian ghost hunting may seem to be more earnest than its Arab counterpart on the surface, I do get the idea while watching these channels that these situations may be fabricated, and the people talking about their houses and apartments being haunted may even just be actors, but I can't say for sure, so I'm not going to pass any definitive judgment. I also think some of the technology they use in these videos is pretty cool, like this body tracking thing they do on a supposedly possessed person. I don't think I've ever seen that done before. The whole production in general is pretty slick, to be honest. It feels on par with something like Nick and Ryan. The most prolific channel making this sort of content is called Vahshat Angizi, Vahshat meaning horror in Persian. I gotta say, the titles of these ghost hunting videos are pretty wild.
This Tehrani boy was looking to gain power from Satan, so he married a genie. This woman is having an affair with a devil son named Murrah. The demon in her body attacked me in Saturn.
And my personal favorite,
we went to the abandoned village and found out why the elves took over the village. They killed Saturn with the intention of killing Saturn.
Saturn, by the way, is referring to Saturn K1, a frequent collaborator of Vahshat Angi and another large Iranian horror channel. With Saturn, we edge closer to the slop side of Iranian horror content. While recently he has done many professional-looking ghost investigations himself, the majority of the content on his channel seems to be reacting to scary videos. This is kind of like SS Sniper Wolf combined with chills, and while it's not a particularly enjoyable format to consume, it is interesting to watch these videos as a way to gauge the sort of spooky stuff Iranian people are seeing themselves on the internet. A lot of it seems to be the sort of stuff you would see here in the West, but I do notice a much larger presence of content from Turkey and the Arab world, with Arab ghost hunting in particular being a fairly common topic. You know, I wonder what this guy's most popular upload is. Let's take a quick look. Oh. Yeah, this video is not age restricted at all. It would seem that some languages get treated less harshly by the content moderation system. I think the biggest thing you'll notice on the horror side of Iranian YouTube is how small it is. Don't get me wrong, the Persian-speaking world is much smaller than the Chinese or Arabic-speaking worlds, but I can probably count all the horror creators here on one hand. Why is that? Is horror just not popular in Iran? Well, that's not the case. There have been some really great Persian horror movies like Under the Shadow or A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. So, what's going on? YouTube is actually completely blocked in Iran, and these channels have to not only upload their content through a VPN, but they also need to have a bank account in another country to make any money from their content because Iran is mostly cut off from the world banking system. If you want to watch online video content in the country completely legitimately, you're likely going to load up a site called Apparat, which is basically the Persian version of YouTube. I couldn't really find any interesting horror content here, but there are Elsagate style creators getting hundreds of thousands of views though. Iran has one of the world's most censored versions of the internet, with over 70% of the World Wide Web being completely blocked off from regular Iranian people, making this country the most restrictive one that I've covered, even more so than China's internet. While many Iranian people get around these restrictions by using VPNs, using a virtual private network is actually illegal in the country, and you can face up to a year in prison if you're caught using one, which isn't impossible considering how surveilled Iranian internet activity is. Speaking of VPNs, a few weeks ago I was in Europe visiting family and I had a bit of a problem. You see, I was eagerly awaiting my chance to get a pre-order for Switch 2 as soon as it went live, but when the time came, all the Canadian stores that launched their pre-orders immediately began to geo-restrict their traffic, meaning I couldn't visit Best Buy or EB Games' website while I was outside of Canada. Normally, this would have been the end of my attempts to get a pre-order, but as you can see, I did manage to get it, and that's all thanks to today's sponsor, Private Internet Access. Private Internet Access is a VPN service that I've been personally using since 2014. If you don't know what a VPN is, it's like a server in a different country that you can redirect your personal internet traffic through, making it appear to everyone else that your traffic is actually coming from that server. There's numerous benefits to doing this, like increased privacy for example. When you use a VPN, people aren't going to see your real location information, but rather the info attached to the server you're using, which effectively masks your real identifying information and makes it much harder for a bad actor to track you down purely through the information attached to your internet traffic. Being able to spoof your location isn't just good for privacy, but also for accessing geo-restricted content. I just talked about being able to shop in a Canadian store while I was abroad in a way I wouldn't have been able to without a VPN. But you can also use private internet access to watch streaming platforms from other countries. For example, I used to live in Poland, and we would very often use private internet access to watch Crave, which is a Canadian streaming service that isn't normally available outside Canada, but it is if you use a VPN. I'm a longtime customer of Private Internet Access. I think they offer a great service for a fair price. One subscription protects an unlimited amount of devices at the same time, and it works for all platforms: Windows, macOS, Android, Linux, iOS, and many more. If you want to try it out, you can get an 83% discount on Private Internet Access by using my link, piavpn.com/PharrellMcGuire. That's only $2.03 a month. On top of that, you can also get an extra 4 months completely for free. Thank you to Private Internet Access for sponsoring this video. Despite all these draconian government restrictions, many Iranian people do still use international social media. If you look at a graph of the share of the social media use in the country, you'll notice one platform in particular is vastly more popular than the others: Instagram, which accounts for 75% of social media use in Iran, and it's also where our next story takes place. In 2017, 19-year-old Fatima Kishvan would create an Instagram account using the name Sahar Tabar. Her first few posts were nothing out of the ordinary, just the sort of normal photos you would expect any young woman to be posting on social media. But as time went on, a strange trend would begin to emerge with her online presence. It seemed like her appearance would slowly begin to devolve, as if she was gradually wasting away over time. She'd start posting photos with bandages covering different parts of her face, and it seemed like she would keep getting skinnier and skinnier with each picture she uploaded. She would start using heavier and more experimental makeup, all while the shape of her body seemed to morph and shift around. These trends would persist until they would eventually hit their boiling point, culminating in the following photos. Over the course of about a year, Sahar Tabar would go from looking like a regular girl to something more akin to a pseudo-human, with all her physical features looking uncanny and bizarre. she would write on her Instagram that achieving this look took almost 50 cosmetic surgeries. Sahar's striking new appearance would make her an overnight international social media sensation. She would end 2017 with more than 400,000 followers, and the West would give her the nickname Zombie Angelina Jolie because of her resemblance with a celebrity. Now, while Sahar had originally said that she had undergone almost 50 surgeries to achieve this appearance, she would eventually admit in several interviews that this was just a joke and that she was merely using makeup and Photoshop to create her signature look. Furthermore, the bandages she was wearing in her earlier pictures were because of a rhinoplasty she had undergone, the only cosmetic surgery she had done other than her lip injections. Rhinoplasties are extremely common in Iran. While Tabar was called Zombie Angelina Jolie by the West, she was never actually trying to look like the actress. She said the main inspiration behind her look was the main character from the 2005 Tim Burton movie, The Corpse Bride, which makes a lot of sense. Sahar also said that her intention behind making these pictures was to become a social media star like the one she had been following. And I mean, it did work. Sahar Tabar became a minor celebrity in Iran, and she would continue to change her style over time, always creating some new and interesting horror-inspired look. Normally, this would be where the story would end, but unfortunately, not in Iran. In 2019, Sahar's fans would be shocked by the news that she had been arrested, with the state slapping her with several charges, including instigating violence, violating the national dress code, and encouraging young people to commit corruption. The main charge Tabar would be hit with, though, was blasphemy. In most countries with a state religion, a blasphemy charge comes about when somebody is being sacrilegious. This is the case in Iran as well, but the government also uses blasphemy laws to imprison people that are criticizing the government in some way, because the assumption is that if you're criticizing the state, you're also criticizing the state religion. Sahar, though, was doing neither, but she still got hit with a charge and was facing minimum 10 years imprisonment. All her social media accounts would disappear, and the government would air an eerie interview with her on television, in which she's wearing a hijab and has her face completely blurred out. The state would introduce her as a zombie and would also put a focus on the fact that she comes from a divorced family. Sahar would talk about how fame ruined her life and how she regrets ever becoming active on social media, although these statements were likely coerced, as is usually the case with these state-run interviews with people convicted of crimes in Iran. Sahar would then be thrown in jail, where she would catch COVID and almost die, having to be put on a ventilator. While this was happening, her lawyers were trying to get an order of temporary release so she could receive proper medical treatment, but the judge presiding over her case was apparently nowhere to be found, so she was effectively stuck inside jail with a serious illness. She would thankfully recover though, and after spending 14 months in jail, she would be acquitted of half of the charges laid against her, and her jail order was converted into a bail order, meaning that she was finally able to be released from jail. Once she got out, she'd do another interview with state television, this time without her face blurred. She would repeat the state narrative about her case, talking about how she went into prison as Sahar Tabar but came out as Fatima Kishvan. She says she regrets doing social media and that her dreams of fame were due to mental illness. She also says that she will not be returning to Instagram because even signing up in the first place was a horrible mistake, and she just wants to live a simple life with her family now. She ends the interview by saying that the judge was very kind and merciful, and that she's eternally grateful that a path for her to repent was opened up to her under Islamic law. After this interview, Fatima would essentially disappear. It was never made clear whether she was fully convicted of the 2 remaining charges against her, which it was never publicly clarified what they even were, and no one knows if she's still free and just not on social media, or if she was actually thrown in prison and is now living out her 10-year prison sentence. All of this was basically over having an unconventional appearance on social media, and sadly, this is far from the only case of content creators being thrown in prison in Iran for merely being successful on social media. Between 2016 and 2020, over 100 people in Iran were arrested for their activities on Instagram, like Syed Moeen Shirazi and his wife Shabnam Sharoki. Syed is a retired kickboxer, and in 2018, he was subject to a campaign of intimidation by Iran's cyber police. Moeen Shirazi was summoned several times for extremely long interrogations, where he would be threatened with jail time unless he signed a pledge of cooperation and removed the post he was charged for. Just what were the police upset about? It was photos Syed posted with his wife where she isn't wearing a hijab, which is technically against the law in Iran. Syed cooperated and removed the photos, but the harassment continued. They would eventually be arrested anyways, despite doing what the police had asked of them. But before the state had a chance to carry out their 16-year prison sentence complete with 74 lashes, the couple and their kids fled to Turkey, where they continue to live today and are still active on Instagram. The idea of the police knocking on your door merely because you posted a picture to social media where you look strange, or even just because you're not properly covering your hair, is horrifying. Maybe not in the way things are usually scary on this channel, but still terrifying nonetheless. And our next topic is going to bring the specific idea of real-life horror to a much higher level. In November 2022, in the ancient city of Qom in northern Iran, videos would begin circulating social media showing multiple ambulances parked outside the Noor Girls Conservatory, which is an art school. Articles in the news would begin popping up detailing how 18 girls have been taken to hospital, all displaying symptoms of gaseous poisoning. While many people expected this to be an isolated mass casualty incident, in the days that followed, more girls would be brought to the hospital, all displaying the same symptoms. It may have begun at the Noor Conservatory, but female students at the Isfahan University of Technology would also begin reporting the same symptoms, and the number of hospitalized girls jumped from 18 to 270, and then to 600. As parents and family members began to fill the streets asking for answers as to what was going on, the problem was swiftly spread outside of Qom into the nearby city of Karaj, with more videos circulating on social media of chaos ensuing in various schools. By the beginning of December, the number of casualties would rise to 1,200. In the months that followed, this phenomenon would reach almost every corner of Iran, eventually touching the capital city of Tehran in February 2023. By March, over 7,000 girls have been hospitalized due to inhaling poisonous gas. The response from the Iranian government on this issue was to deny that it was even happening, saying that they had found no evidence of any chemical attacks and that the poisonings were no more than a hoax designed by foreign enemies to sow chaos in the country. While it is a lie to say that this was all a hoax, considering these hospitalizations most certainly did happen, oddly enough, it wasn't just the Iranian government who couldn't find any evidence of a chemical attack. Many Western sources began pondering the possibility that these poisonings might actually be something called a mass psychogenic illness, or in other words, mass hysteria. In cases of mass psychogenic illness, symptoms spread throughout a cohesive group of people without any known contagion. The most common symptoms of mass hysteria line up with all the symptoms reported by the affected women in Iran, including headaches, dizziness, nausea, coughing, and fatigue. Probably the most famous case of mass hysteria in history were the dancing plagues of the Middle Ages. These cases happened in mainland Europe and involved very large crowds of people gathering together and dancing erratically for days at a time until they collapsed from exhaustion and even died in some cases. These dancing plagues occurred many times in many countries throughout the Middle Ages, but the most well-documented case was in Strasbourg in France in 1518, which started with a single woman dancing in the street. People would slowly start to join her in her trance, and a month later, 400 people were feverishly driving in the streets of Strasbourg. The most commonly accepted explanation as to why dancing plagues happen was because of greatly elevated levels of psychological stress. These crowds are typically made up of peasants and other poor-to-do people, who usually lived in very rough conditions in this time period, which had no doubt contributed to large amounts of stress, maybe not unlike the sort of strain women who live in extremely restrictive religious fundamentalist societies feel. Western medical professionals have drawn parallels between this case in Iran and similar situations that have happened previously in both Afghanistan and Palestine. The latter case took place in 1983, and it was a fainting epidemic that saw almost 1,000 young Palestinian women get hospitalized. While 20% of the hospitalizations were the result of real gas inhalation, the remaining 80% of cases were deemed psychosomatic and were said to have no physical cause. The Afghani case took place between 2009 and 2016 and played out much like the poisonings in Iran, with young girls in particular being targeted. The one thing that links all these cases together, however, are questionable investigations. The Taliban, the IDF, and the Iranian government all originally blamed their hospitalizations on mass hysteria, but then backtracked and changed their story somewhat as the situation developed and outsiders got a better look into what was happening. In every case, the powers that be had some sort of reason to downplay their respective situations. In Palestine, young girls being poisoned would be seen as a horrible war crime committed by Israel. In Iran and Afghanistan, it would be seen as acts of terrorism designed to keep women from receiving an education. While many Western investigators looking into this situation in Iran supported the idea that these poisonings might be nothing more than a mass hallucination, these theories were based on evidence they received directly from the Iranian government, who would have an incentive to support the mass hysteria theory. While some experts use the fact that these poisonings affected a very narrow demographic of people to support the psychosomatic illness theory, it's also worth mentioning that the vast majority of these attacks supposedly occurred at women-only schools, Who else is going to be affected at a school for girls other than young women? The people who think that the government was behind these attacks and were trying to cover it up using the mass hysteria theory see these poisonings as a sort of revenge for the Mahsa Amini protests, which were the biggest protests in Iran since the Islamic Revolution in 1979. They started when Mahsa Amini, a university student, died in police custody after she was arrested for not wearing a hijab. These protests are mostly led by and made up of young female students, the same demographic of people targeted by the poisonings. I think the thing that really drives a nail in the coffin of the mass hysteria theory is the fact that the Iranian state would eventually arrest over 100 people who they said had been complicit in the poisonings. Now, the state narrative had changed from psychosomatic illness to hardline Islamist groups who wanted to stop women from being able to receive an education. Just like with Sahar Tabar, Iran would air confessions from these supposed terrorists, but it's worth noting that the state often coerces these testimonials using torture. After these arrests, the government would stop talking about these attacks, and that's pretty much where the situation has been left, unfortunately. No third party has been able to go to Iran to perform an independent investigation, so unfortunately, we're basically only left with these three theories: mass hysteria, a government act of terroristic revenge, or an act of terrorism by a hardline Islamic group. I'm only going to present you the facts here. I'm not going to tell you which theory you should choose, but I would be curious to hear what you guys believe happened here. Iran is a very interesting study in humanity. While the Iranian people might live under one of the most restrictive and oppressive regimes in the modern world, it hasn't really done much to dampen their culture. I mentioned a couple Iranian horror movies that I liked, but Iran in general has a thriving movie scene. Some of my other favorites include A Separation, which is a movie about a family breaking up, which definitely hits hard if you come from a divorced household yourself. I also really like The Salesman, which is one of those movies where you're just kind of holding your breath for the whole thing because it's so tense. I've also had The Seed of a Sacred Fig in my watch list forever. I really gotta get around to that one sometime. I can't really name another religious fundamentalist country that has such a thriving art scene. I think it just goes to show you that sometimes the human spirit is so strong that you just can't dampen it no matter how much censorship and jail time you throw at your population. Anyways guys, I think that's about it for today. Before we end the video, I want to give a huge shout out to Rozan Seri, a former journalist from Iran who sent me a great write-up detailing a bunch of different Iranian topics, which both gave me the idea for this video and helped me jumpstart my research. She has an Instagram account revolving around books, so be sure to go show her some support. And last but certainly not least, thank you for watching. Have a good night.